With new leadership in the Politburo and Xi Jinping Thought on Socialism with Chinese Characteristics for a new era adopted into the party constitution, China is stepping up the pace of national rejuvenation. The aims are to create a moderately prosperous society, maintain zero tolerance on corruption, ensure every dimension of governance is based on law, and transform the national armed services into a world-class military. How will the new leadership team influence China and the world going forward? What are the challenges they face, and how does the rest of the world view the continuing rise of China? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Professor Zha Daojun from Peking University and Lawrence Brown, founding director of the Himalayan Consensus Institute. We shall also talk via satellite to Cheng Li, director and senior fellow of the John L. Thornton China Center for the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. But before we get started, let's look at this.
At the first plenum of the 19th CPC Central Committee, 25 were elected as members of the Communist Party's decision-making organ, the CPC Political Bureau, also known as the Politburo. Among them, 7 were further appointed as members of the Politburo Standing Committee. General Secretary Xi Jinping gave a detailed introduction of the group while they meet the press for the first time.
在刚才召开的中共19届
We have just held the first plenary session of the 19th Central Committee and elected a new central leadership. I was re-elected General Secretary of the CPC Central Committee. I see this as not just approval of my work, but also encouragement that will spur me on. Now I wish to present to you the other 6 members who have also been elected to the Standing Committee of the Political Bureau.
常委同志，李克强同志，
Comrade 李克强，
栗战书同志，
Comrade 栗战书，
汪洋同志，
Comrade 汪洋，
王沪宁同志，
Comrade 王沪宁，
赵乐际同志，
Comrade 赵乐际，
韩正同志。
and Comrade 韩正。
其中李克强同志是18届中央政治局常委。
Comrade 李克强 served on the Political Bureau Standing Committee of the 18th CPC Central Committee, while all the others were members of the Political Bureau of the 18th CPC Central Committee. You can learn more about them from the media.
In his speech, General Secretary Xi Jinping also said he hopes the new leadership will act accordingly, abiding by new principles and rules under the new political environment in this new era.
经过长期努力，中国特色社会主义
With decades of hard work, socialism with Chinese characteristics has entered a new era. In this new context, we must get a new look and, more importantly, make new accomplishments. The coming 5 years between the 19th and the 20th Party Congress is a period in which the time frames of the 2 centenary goals will converge. Not only must we deliver the first centenary goal, we must also embark on the journey towards the second centenary goal. As I look ahead to the next 5 years, I see several important junctures and signposts.
The 19th CPC National Congress was concluded on Tuesday. The Congress voted to include Xi Jinping Thought on Socialism with Chinese Characteristics for a New Era into the party constitution. Under the leadership of General Secretary Xi, the CPC will continue to lead the Chinese people to build a moderately prosperous society and realize the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation.
Now, gentlemen, with the end of the Cold War, in the early 1990s, the international communist movement dropped to a historical low, particularly the Soviet Union disintegrated. And yet China is fast ascending to the center stage of world economy and world geopolitics, to the surprise of so many who follow the political process and the economic expansion of this country under the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party. Now, gentlemen, there are only just a few ruling communist parties in the world. So do you think the whole of the West feels extremely uncomfortable with the fact that the Chinese Communist Party is getting so strong? We start from Lawrence.
I think the key thing to look at here is Chinese socialism in the new era. This is the key word, because if you think about it, Marxism as a concept, as a ideological theory, was relevant in the 19th century during the Industrial Revolution for analyzing class issues. Now you're looking at a China today that's leading the world in artificial intelligence investment. It's leading the world in green finance and green bonds. It's leading the world in all kinds of areas of development in the underdeveloped world, as well as, trying to resolve the last pockets of poverty in the country. So it's really an enormous transition that's taking place in thinking in the new era. And from the words of President Xi Jinping this morning, it's very clear that he's thinking ahead. The Communist Party is looking not at the plans that are ahead of it, the traditional 5-year plan. It's looking into the next century. This is a long-term vision, and implementation is going to need a lot of new thinking. Key terms are in the Constitution now that were adopted over the past week, such as innovation, creativity, ecological civilization. It is a new era.
Lawrence, there is no question about the global impact, but Dow Jones, a leading article of Financial Times, accused China of challenging the West on multiple fronts, ideologically, economically, militarily, geopolitically, you name it. So my question again is, do you believe the West feels very uncomfortable with the rapid expansion of China, politically and economically? And what do you think should be the balanced relationship between us and the West?
Well, I'm not so sure if a commentary in the Financial Times represents the view of the West. It's the view of a writer, it's a view of a newspaper, maybe editorial board.
But I'm afraid it reflects the sentiment.
Yeah, the sentiment is there. It's very important to understand that China, or the Chinese Communist Party, the mission is not to, should we say, safeguard the staying power of communist parties, much less this vision of worldwide communism, as Larry just got at. Communism itself as a concept is changing. Especially here in China, we have emphasized again and again the signification of communist thoughts, 共产主义的中国化, or that itself is a challenge to ourselves. That itself is a core for ourselves to innovate. So in other words, when you talk about a fear or resentment of communism out of the West, I'm not so sure what communism we are talking about. Many scholars, including the folks sitting here, would be raising eyebrows if we were asked to answer how communist indeed is China, if that definition were held by those things in the textbooks taught in Western colleges and high schools.
Well, let me go to Chen Li with Brookings Institution for his thoughts. What's going to happen during the upcoming official visit by Donald Trump, the first of its kind since he took office 1 year or so ago? Do you think you're going to foresee more of nail-biting negotiations between the two biggest economies, or it's going to be a more constructive dialogue between President Xi Jinping and his American counterpart? And what will be the major issues following the 19th Party Congress?
Well, President Donald Trump is a businessman, and fortunately, he's not that ideological as the early part of the show that indicate. If he think that all the things about the communist or communist threat or China threat, he will not have that trip to China. But he understands that China has changed and changed profoundly and become a very important player in world affairs, especially on nuclear non-proliferation and trade issues. I think that's the purpose of his trip. Now, we still do not know whether the trip will really enhance the state-to-state level, but we do know that President Donald Trump has a good personal relationship with Xi Jinping, and he is very much interested in to expand that relationship to nation-to-nation friendship or understanding. Of course, there's some legitimate issues from his part, and particularly, he wants China to play an even more important role in the denuclearization in the Korean Peninsula, which is also China's vital interest. At the same time, that he wanted to raise some issues on the issue of economic front. I think what you said, whether it's cooperative, I certainly hope so. But the important thing is that America is a very pluralistic country, just like China becoming increasingly pluralistic. There's different voices, different views, but we do need to know what's the president, the White House view, and that view will carry much weight for bilateral relationship in the months and years to come.
Likewise, the spectrum of public opinions is getting more diverse in China, very much like what's happening in the United States when it comes to the bilateral relationship between these two biggest economies. Let me have your thoughts, Li Cheng, about what do you think are the most interesting and impressive points concerning the outcome of just concluded 19th National Congress, particularly this morning, the press briefing between the new makeup of the pinnacle body, the Politburo Standing Committee, and the media in the Great Hall of the People. What do you make of the impact of such a presentation?
Well, new era, new agenda. Now we see the new team, and I just want to talk about the new team. This is really a group of very capable people. Li Zhansu has the work experience in 4 provinces as a provincial leader, from Hebei, Heilongjiang, and Shanxi, and the last Guizhou. And Wang Funing, as we know, that he is a scholar, the law professor, the dean of law school at Fudan, and worked very closely with 3 presidents of China, Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao, and Xi Jinping. And also Wang Yang is a well-experienced economic administrator. He worked in 2 major provincial entities, Guangdong and Chongqing, and also had a solid experience in the State Council, first as the Deputy General Secretary, and then in the past 5 years as Vice Premier. He is very liberal-minded. And also same things you can say for Han Zheng, who really runs the largest city in China, and Shanghai. It's very liberal-minded, market-oriented, has great reputation when he met with foreigners, and also as popular mayor and popular party secretary in Shanghai. And finally, Zhao Leji worked in the inland region for a long time in Qinghai and Shanxi, and he is a great person to push for poverty reduction, which is the agenda for China. So that should uplift the confidence among Chinese, but also if we in the West have a better understanding of this team, we'll see great opportunity in terms of market reform, in terms of China play a more positive role in all the front. But China needs to convey that message to the outside world.
Thank you very much for your encouraging analysis about the makeup of the new pinnacle body, the Standing Committee of the Politburo. Now, I'm afraid you guys may not disagree completely with him or what he said. With regard to the so-called liberal-minded or reformist-minded members of the Standing Committee, he analyzed every and each of them on the team of the Standing Committee. In sharp contrast is what we see and feel in a very cautious way. Internally, the whole party of 90 million will be more disciplined. And China is increasingly viewed as a strong factor of uncertainty for geopolitical scenario in the world. So what do you make of the rosy picture that Li Cheng presents here?
I'm not so sure if he's presenting a rosy picture. There is a typology in the analysis that he just presented. I'm not talking about himself. I'm talking about that view. That is to divide the leadership here in China, or the thinking of the leadership, as some so-called pro-reform, some less. And out of that analysis, there is an implication that for a foreign government or even for foreign businesses to try to get involved in the process of decision-making in China and try to influence and try to nudge certain developments into certain directions. That's very risky, and it has been shown in the past. I think that line of analysis can be risky, it can be harmful to state-to-state level relations. It's, in diplomatic language, it could result in interference in some countries' domestic affairs. Now, coming back to what you said about under the new leadership, the call for more discipline. The discipline is not just to be within the party, the discipline has to be transformed across the society. Now, it depends on how you define it. If discipline is first and foremost enshrined in law and in the policy consultation process, what involves the different interests and voices in the party, not just the party, or across the society. If you recall, one of the things President Xi has just articulated, if I can translate it in my own way into English, that is to say, in the effort to eliminate poverty, to develop, nobody should be left behind. In other words, regardless of your ethnicity, regardless of your base. These are things that can need a strong, let's say, visible hand from the government. If you leave it, for example, to the so-called invisible hand of the market, a lot of people will be left behind. So in that sense, discipline is good. So we need to talk about this case by case. Now, just very quickly, a lot of times at these kind of junctures of political developments, commentators from the West would be interested in making a judgment. They say how far China still is from the ideal of a model that's based on Western experience. I'm not so sure that kind of comparison is that relevant anymore today, because especially against these past few years in that right. It's time and again we're reminded no political system is ironclad perfect.
Fine, we have a 19 million Communist Party, the biggest ruling party in the world, to ensure consistency and efficiency in policy execution. However, at the same time, do you think execution of such consistent policies will be made possible at the cost of the market forces and individuality? Because we have a growing army of the middle class whose appeal for rule of law demands unconditional respect for independent judiciary according to the Western discourse on modernity of a transitional economy. Do you think we're going to have more structural contradictions between what the ruling party wants to really have to ensure discipline and what a modernized civil society actually needs?
I think the Western analysts and media are getting too stuck on the word communism and not looking at what's really happening. This is all about pragmatism. So first of all, you talked about the lineup of leadership and their experience. All of the standing committee members have run cities or provincial governments that have GDP the size of most of the most industrialized countries in Europe. So they have a lot of experience, whether it's in Qinghai, dealing with poverty relief, or in Shanghai dealing with high finance, or in Hebei province where it's heavy industry. So this is really a leadership about pragmatism. I think the new era is about pragmatism. Moreover, this thing about reformists versus conservatives is a Western stereotype that there have to be two teams, two parties out there. This is about consensus. What took place at the Congress has been going on for months, if not even a couple of years ahead, in preparation for what is a very long-term working plan. That was what was approved. It's like a shareholders meeting at a major corporation with now the new elected board of directors running the show. So I think pragmatism is the point. The other thing that came out that was put into the Constitution was the concept of the China solution. China has faced all kinds of challenges over the years. It's adopted many policies. Some have worked excellently, some have not worked, in which they've had to retrench, rethink, redo it, and start again. An example of that was the high GDP growth, which in the 1990s, in the beginning of the decade of the new century, was able to employ a lot of people and deal with a lot of reemployment issues and the restructuring of the economy. The end game of that over the past few years has been rapid pollution, deterioration of the environment, water, food security, health security issues. Now those are being rectified, all being addressed. Ecological civilizations putting renewable energy systems, green grids, and finance for green bonds. China is the #1 leader in the world in green bonds, with only a few years of issuing the first one, at the forefront of change and making that the new megatrend. So this is a government and leadership that's thinking out of the box, looking ahead and responding rather than reacting to crisis. And I think the comment in the Financial Times is really not about the Chinese Communist Party asserting itself. It's more about the West dropping the ball. We have had, dropping the ball on climate change with our own administration in the United States, with Donald Trump. We've had a situation where promises of infrastructure upgrades have not been met. The infrastructure in America is totally outdated. Europe is following the same sort of lack of direction, frankly. And here we have direction in China. We have a government that is at least facing the challenges head-on and dealing with them, and looking ahead into the next generation, the expectations of managing a middle class, which may be the next big challenge, because now with the elimination of the last pockets of poverty, it's another 150 million people, but that's going to be done over the next 5 years. Managing the expectations of the middle class will be a big challenge, and that's going to involve higher quality standards, quality of growth, not hyper-growth. And I think restructuring of the healthcare system. I'm more interested in learning about the reform of the healthcare system now than talking about reformers against conservatives. This is a Western stereotype.
Thank you very much. Let me go back to Chen Li again. Now, these two guests in Beijing studio have been critical of the stereotypes employed by Western media in their examination of the new realities and evolution of the Chinese politics and economy over the past 3 decades or so. The same is being done by Eric Li, the guy who's from UC Berkeley and Fudan University with a degree of political science. He was pouring scorns on The Economist, a prestigious journal which has been proved wrong over and over for the past 3 decades on the issue of China. There are many books on China, tons of articles about China. Many of them came from the prestigious journal of Economist, which said, well, China will disintegrate and the economy will definitely fail. Today, they have been proved wrong. So what do you think is the major driving force, and what are the major reasons behind the alleged success of the Chinese economy? Of course, we have internal problems, and the crisis would chiefly come from within. We never underestimate the adversity of the new situations here China is facing. So what do you think, the question I put on the table here?
Well, first let me say that I agree with the other two guests about their concern, their criticism of the mainstream views in the West. But of course, the Western view is also quite pluralistic. It's not just that view. Now, but particularly, I want to challenge the early speaker in the panel to talk about, we cannot make any, positive comment on Chinese leaders. Actually, this is a reason that we go back to reinforce the traditional or conventional wisdom about these Chinese leaders are kind of maybe conservative or whatever. But the thing is, if you have better understanding of these leaders, you can make a judgment who are more conservative, who are more liberal. Of course, I agree with that. To a certain extent, they are both. But nevertheless, some people have the great experience and push for market reform. People like Wang Yang, like Han Zheng, and also all other newly elected leaders. They are all popular in that regard. Of course, there are some more conservative people. So I think the important things, we should have a more concrete understanding of a Chinese leader. Otherwise, I would say cynicism, just like dogmatism, is just an excuse of intellectual laziness. Now, to answer your question, because the past 5 years, there's more urgent issues for Xi Jinping and his team to fix. And China 5 years ago was in a terrible situation with the cases like Bo Xilai, like Lin Jihua, and widespread corruption, and also military started to disobey the civilian leadership. So the priority should be on these things. But at the same time, also Xi Jinping's people, the team, the economic technocrats are not well positioned in the provincial level of leadership. Now this is going to be changed. And also, of course, China's economic reform will depend on international environment. I hope that the environment will conducive enough for China to make progress. Again, I'm very confident about this leadership. Of course, I'm not naive. I know the challenges, and also these leaders also will put their national interests first. That's not surprise. But at the same time, they have better understanding of the outside world, better understanding of the economic realization than many of their colleagues around the world.
I appreciate your articulation of your point. Li Cheng, the press corps is clearly aware of 4 central agencies to be established with the success of the 19th Party Congress. First and foremost is the organization that will supervise a comprehensive exercise of rule-based governance. In Chinese, 中央全面依法治国领导小组. Now we have the Central Commission of Discipline Inspection. We have the Anti-Corruption Bureau, and we have many similar organizations to fight corruption. Why should we decide to form this new agency? Very quickly.
Well, again, this reflects the central leadership's concern that the previous anti-corruption campaign and many other things is more campaign-driven, but now they will move to gradually to a more institutional law-based mechanism. Of course, this is a hard transition, but the more institutional arrangement, the more institutional mechanism to prevent the future corruption, I think it's far more important. So I don't think there are too many these institutions, but the important thing is to make them real, make them really implement the policies. But we should welcome this institutional development rather than just everything decided by one individual or a few leaders.
Thank you so much, Li Cheng. Very quickly, Daojun and Lawrence, what about the 3 other major agencies? One is to supervise management of the ex-servicemen whose dissatisfaction has been prioritized and generated a lot of front-page stories in the past few years. One movie, Youth, is even barred from being released in the Chinese cinemas. It's directed by Feng Xiaogang because of our concerns on the ex-servicemen. What do you think of the consequences if we fail to manage the issue properly?
Well, the management of military veterans is a very difficult issue, very touchy, because these are, even though for China we have not had a major war for some 40 years, the challenge is much more heart-wrenching in many other countries. But I would think I'm not an expert on it, but the creation of a separate agency to handle this is a way to answer the cause for these people who devoted a portion of their time to the service of the country.
So that the men and women in uniform will be more loyal to their duty and perform their duty with a big relief. The last question.
I'm not so sure that's the issue. I think with or without the agency, men and women in uniform will have to obey the discipline. That's the first and foremost rule in the military.
Ecosystem is prioritized, and an organization will be set up to manage the state-run resources and the natural ecosystem. Well, we don't have enough time to fully discuss the other 3 agencies. That's our discussion about the latest outcome of the 19th National Congress. We're going to have a new roadmap to navigate China's course of the development and modernization. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.